I discovered hidden cameras in my bathroom and bedroom, and found out my own grandchildren have been secretly filming me and selling the videos online to strangers with a fetish for elderly women. The worst part, my videos are getting more views than anything they've ever posted on their social media accounts. Before we dive into this shocking story, please hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. My name is Margaret, and I'm 77 years old. For the past 6 months, I thought I was the luckiest grandmother in the world because my grandchildren Jake and Emma, both in their early 20s, had suddenly become so attentive and loving. They went from barely visiting me twice a year to showing up at my house 3 or 4 times a week, always with big smiles, warm hugs, and stories about how much they missed spending time with their dear old grandma. I live alone in the same 2-bedroom house where I raised my children after my husband passed away 15 years ago. It's a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, but it's been paid off for decades, and it's filled with memories of a lifetime. My children, David and Susan, live in other states with their own busy lives, so when Jake and Emma started visiting so frequently, I was absolutely delighted. Jake is my son David's boy, 23 years old, tall and handsome with his grandfather's blue eyes and a charming smile that reminds me so much of his father at that age. Emma is my daughter Susan's girl, 21 years old, petite and pretty with long blonde hair and the kind of energy that lights up a room. They're both college students, or at least they're supposed to be, though I've been wondering lately how they manage to visit me so often when they should be in classes. The sudden increase in their visits started back in February. Before that, I was lucky if I saw them during major holidays, and even then, they seemed more interested in their phones than in spending time with their elderly grandmother. But something changed, and suddenly they were showing up every few days, always together, always cheerful, always insisting on helping me around the house. At first, I was thrilled. What grandmother wouldn't be happy to have her grandchildren showing such interest in spending time with her? They would arrive in the early afternoon, usually when I was settling in for my daily nap, and they would insist on cooking dinner for me, helping with household chores, and just sitting around chatting about their lives. They asked about my health, my friends, my daily routines, and they seemed genuinely interested in everything I had to say. Jake would often comment on how well I was aging, telling me I looked much younger than my 77 years. Emma would compliment my outfits, even when I was just wearing my comfortable around-the-house clothes, and she would always encourage me to tell stories about my younger days. They seemed particularly interested in hearing about my life in the 1960s and 70s, asking detailed questions about fashion, dating, and what it was like to be a young woman during those decades. I found their interest in my past both flattering and touching. Most young people today seem to have no patience for stories from their elders, but Jake and Emma hung on every word. They would ask me to show them old photo albums, and Emma would often comment on how beautiful I was when I was young, saying things like, "Grandma, you were such a knockout. You could have been a model." During their visits, they would often split up to help with different tasks around the house. Jake would usually work in the living room or kitchen, while Emma would help me organize things in my bedroom or bathroom. They installed new light fixtures, replaced some old electrical outlets, and even updated my smoke detectors, all while insisting that they just wanted to make sure I was safe and comfortable. I was so grateful for their help and attention that I never questioned their motives or wondered why they were suddenly so interested in home improvement projects. When you're living alone at my age, having young, strong family members willing to help with maintenance tasks feels like a blessing from heaven. The only thing that struck me as slightly odd was how they always seemed to have their phones out, constantly taking pictures and videos during our visits. When I asked about it, they would laugh and say they were documenting our time together to share with their parents, or that they were creating memories to look back on when they were older. Emma would often say things like, "Grandma, you're so photogenic. We need to capture all these precious moments." They also had a peculiar habit of arriving right around the time I usually took my afternoon nap. I've been taking a daily nap for as long as I can remember. It's just part of my routine as I've gotten older. I usually lie down around 2 o'clock and rest for about an hour before getting up to prepare for the rest of my day. Jake and Emma always seemed to time their visits perfectly, arriving just as I was settling down for my nap. "Don't mind us, Grandma," they would say. "You go ahead and rest. We'll just quietly work on some projects around the house while you sleep." I thought it was considerate of them to let me maintain my routine while they took care of things that needed attention. Sometimes I would wake up from my nap to find them in different rooms than where I'd left them, but they always had reasonable explanations. "We decided to organize your medicine cabinet," Emma would say, or "Jake was fixing that loose handle on your dresser drawer." I appreciated their initiative and never thought to question their movements around my house. As the weeks went on, their visits became even more frequent and their behavior became slightly more peculiar, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. They started bringing me gifts, nice soaps and lotions, new pajamas and nightgowns, even some makeup that Emma insisted would bring out my natural beauty. They also began making suggestions about my daily routines, encouraging me to take longer baths, to spend more time getting ready in the mornings, and to wear some of the prettier clothes that had been hanging unused in my closet. "Grandma, you should dress up more often," Emma would say. "You have such beautiful clothes and you look so elegant when you make an effort. There's no reason to save your nice things for special occasions. Every day should be special." Jake would chime in with comments about how I was aging gracefully and how I should embrace my confidence. They would often comment on my appearance in ways that, looking back, seem inappropriate, but at the time I interpreted as loving encouragement from grandchildren who wanted their grandmother to feel good about herself. They also started asking detailed questions about my daily routine that seemed oddly specific. What time did I usually get up in the morning? When did I take my shower? Did I prefer baths or showers? What did I usually wear to bed? When did I get dressed and undressed each day? At the time, I thought they were just making conversation and showing interest in my life, but their questions were more focused and purposeful than I realized. The breakthrough moment came about 3 weeks ago when I was looking for my reading glasses and decided to check behind my bedroom dresser, thinking they might have fallen back there. As I was moving the dresser slightly to look behind it, I noticed something strange, a small black object attached to the wall near the floor, partially hidden by the furniture. At first, I thought it might be some kind of electrical component related to the outlet work that Jake had done in my room several weeks earlier. But when I looked more closely, I realized it was something I'd never seen before, a small device with what looked like a tiny lens pointing into my room. I didn't immediately understand what I was looking at, but something about it made me uncomfortable. I've lived in this house for decades, and I know every inch of it. This device was definitely not something that had been there before my grandchildren started their helpful home improvement projects. That evening, after Jake and Emma had left, I called my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who's about my age but much more tech-savvy than I am. I described what I'd found, and her reaction was immediate and alarming. "Margaret, that sounds like a hidden camera," she said, her voice filled with concern. "You need to check your entire house right away. If there's one, there might be more." The idea that someone had placed cameras in my home was so shocking that I could barely process it. Who would do such a thing, and why, Mrs. Patterson offered to come over the next morning to help me search, but I was too embarrassed and confused to accept her help immediately. Instead, I spent a sleepless night wondering what was really going on in my own home. The next morning, I began my own investigation. Armed with a flashlight and a determination to understand what was happening, I started examining every room in my house more carefully than I ever had before. What I discovered made my blood run cold. There were cameras everywhere. I found a tiny camera disguised as a screw head in my bathroom, positioned to capture the shower and toilet area. There was another one hidden in the light fixture above my bathroom mirror. In my bedroom, I discovered not just the one I'd found behind the dresser, but but two more, one hidden in a picture frame on my nightstand and another concealed in the ceiling fan. The living room had cameras hidden in the smoke detector and behind a decorative plant on the bookshelf. Even my kitchen had a camera built into what I'd thought was a new electrical outlet that Jake had installed to help with my small appliances. As I made these discoveries, the full scope of what was happening began to dawn on me. My grandchildren hadn't been visiting out of love and concern for their aging grandmother. They had been systematically installing surveillance equipment throughout my house, recording my most private moments without my knowledge or consent. But why? What could they possibly want with videos of their elderly grandmother going about her daily routine? The answer to that question would prove to be even more disturbing than the discovery of the cameras themselves. I spent the entire day removing every camera I could find, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and violation. By evening, I had collected 7 small recording devices from various locations throughout my house. Each one was sophisticated and expensive-looking, clearly not some amateur operation but professional-grade surveillance equipment. That night, I sat in my living room holding all 7 cameras in my lap, trying to understand what my own grandchildren had done to me and why. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. These were children I had loved and trusted, children I had welcomed into my home with open arms, children who had looked me in the eye and told me they loved me while secretly violating my privacy in the most intimate ways possible. I knew I needed help understanding what I was dealing with, so the next morning I swallowed my pride and called Mrs. Patterson. When she came over and saw the collection of cameras I'd found, her face went pale. "Oh, Margaret," she said, sitting down heavily in my kitchen chair, "this is much worse than I thought. These aren't just random cameras, these are specifically designed for secret recording. Someone has been watching you without your knowledge." Mrs. Patterson's daughter works in technology, so she called her for advice on what to do next. Her daughter recommended that we take the cameras to a computer specialist who could potentially trace where the recordings were being sent or stored. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson drove me to a small computer repair shop downtown where a young man named Kevin looked at the cameras with growing concern. After examining them for about an hour, he delivered news that made my stomach turn. "These cameras have been transmitting to online storage accounts," he explained. "Based on the model numbers and capabilities, they're designed for live streaming and recording. Someone has been watching and recording everything these cameras could see, and they've been storing or broadcasting that content somewhere online." "Broadcasting?" I asked, not understanding the full implications. "Yes, ma'am. These types of cameras are often used for streaming live video to websites. It's possible that people have been watching you in real time, not just recording for later viewing." The room seemed to spin around me as the reality of what Kevin was telling me sank in. Not only had my grandchildren been secretly recording me, but they might have been broadcasting my most private moments to strangers on the internet. The violation felt so complete and devastating that I could barely breathe. Kevin was able to trace some of the camera's digital signatures and discovered that they were connected to accounts registered under Jake's name. He also found evidence that the cameras had been active for approximately 4 months, which aligned perfectly with when my grandchildren had started their frequent visits. "I hate to ask this," Kevin said gently, "but do you have any idea why someone might want to secretly record you? Is there anything valuable in your home or any reason someone might want to spy on your activities?" I couldn't imagine what anyone would find interesting about watching a 77-year-old woman go about her daily routine. "I don't have valuable jewelry or large amounts of money lying around. I don't have any secrets or do anything that would be worth secretly recording." The whole situation was baffling and humiliating. Kevin suggested that I might want to contact the police, but I wasn't ready to take that step yet. These were my grandchildren after all, and despite what they'd done, I needed to understand their motives before involving law enforcement. I asked Kevin if there was any way to find out where the recordings had been going or what had been done with them. That's going to require some more sophisticated investigation, he said. But I can tell you that these cameras are primarily used for streaming to adult websites that cater to specific fetishes and interests. Based on the placement of the cameras in your bathroom and bedroom, I'm afraid the content was likely being shared on sites that focus on, well, on older adults in private settings. The euphemistic way Kevin explained it didn't hide the terrible reality of what he was telling me. My grandchildren had been secretly filming me in my most private moments and sharing those recordings with strangers who had a sexual interest in watching elderly women without their knowledge. I felt physically sick. The thought that strangers had been watching me shower, dress, undress, and sleep was horrifying enough. But knowing that my own grandchildren had orchestrated this violation made it exponentially worse. How could children I had loved and trusted do something so cruel and exploitative to their own grandmother? Kevin gave me contact information for a private investigator who specialized in internet crimes and privacy violations. He also suggested that I change all the locks in my house and consider installing a legitimate security system to prevent any future unauthorized access. That evening, I sat alone in my house, looking at the 7 cameras laid out on my kitchen table like evidence of a crime I never imagined could happen to me. I felt violated, betrayed, and humiliated in ways I'd never experienced before. But underneath all of those emotions was a growing anger that burned hotter than anything else I was feeling. These children had not only violated my privacy, they had potentially been profiting from that violation. They had been selling access to their grandmother's most private moments to strangers on the internet. The more I thought about it, the more furious I became. I decided to hire the private investigator that Kevin had recommended. If Jake and Emma were going to exploit their elderly grandmother for money, I was going to find out exactly what they'd been doing and make sure they faced consequences for their actions. The private investigator, a woman named Sarah Chen, met with me the following day. She was professional, compassionate, and reassuring, which I desperately needed given how violated and confused I was feeling. Sarah explained that cases like mine were becoming increasingly common as technology made it easier for people to secretly record and broadcast private content. Unfortunately, family members are often the perpetrators in these situations, she told me. They have access to the victim's home and the victim's trust, which makes it easy to install hidden cameras without being detected. The financial incentive from adult websites has created a market for this type of content. Sarah agreed to investigate where my recordings had been shared and what kind of audience they had reached. She also offered to look into Jake and Emma's online activities to understand the full scope of their operation and determine if they had victimized anyone else. I have to warn you, Sarah said before beginning her investigation, what we might discover could be very disturbing. Are you prepared to learn the details of how your privacy was violated? I told her that I needed to know everything. As painful as the truth might be, I couldn't make decisions about how to respond without understanding the full extent of what had been done to me. Sarah's investigation took about a week, and when she called to schedule a meeting to discuss her findings, the tone of her voice told me that the news was going to be bad. Very bad. We met at her office, and Sarah presented me with a thick folder containing printouts, screenshots, and detailed reports about what she had discovered. As she walked me through her findings, I felt like I was hearing about someone else's life, not my own. Jake and Emma had been operating several accounts on adult websites that specialized in amateur elderly content, as Sarah delicately phrased it. They had been streaming live video from my home and also selling recorded content to subscribers who paid monthly fees for access to what the sites advertised as real granny cam footage. The financial records that Sarah had uncovered showed that Jake and Emma had been earning between $3,000 and $5,000 per month from their exploitation of me. They had been in business for over 4 months, meaning they had potentially made $15,000 to $20,000 by secretly filming their grandmother. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Sarah had discovered that my content was among the most popular on the sites where it was being shared. My videos had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times, and I had apparently developed what could only be described as a fan following among the site's users. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," Sarah said, "but your content was generating more revenue and getting more views than anything else your grandchildren had ever posted online. You were, in effect, their most successful product." The irony was so twisted that I almost laughed despite the horror of the situation. My grandchildren, who were supposedly social media savvy and constantly posting content online, had found their most successful internet venture by secretly exploiting their elderly grandmother. The content they created by violating my privacy was more popular than anything they had ever done legitimately. Sarah had also discovered that Jake and Emma had been planning to expand their operation. They had purchased additional cameras and were apparently planning to install them in other areas of my house, including the guest bathroom and the basement recreation room where I sometimes exercised. The evidence also showed that they had been actively promoting their content on social media and in online forums, describing it as featuring an authentic gilf who was completely unaware of being filmed. They had been marketing my violation as entertainment for strangers who got pleasure from watching unsuspecting elderly women. Reading the promotional descriptions of my content that Jake and Emma had written was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. They had reduced their grandmother to a sexual object for the entertainment of strangers, and they had done it with apparent enthusiasm and pride in their business venture. Sarah asked me what I wanted to do with the information she had gathered. The evidence was strong enough to support criminal charges for invasion of privacy, exploitation of an elderly person, and potentially other crimes related to non-consensual recording and distribution of private content. I told Sarah I needed time to think about my options. Despite everything Jake and Emma had done to me, they were still my grandchildren, and the thought of sending them to prison was devastating. But the thought of letting them continue to exploit elderly people was equally unacceptable. That night, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of immediately calling the police or confronting Jake and Emma directly, I decided to gather some evidence of my own. If they could secretly record me, I could secretly record them. The next day, I went to the same computer store where Kevin worked and purchased a small recording device that I could conceal in my living room. I also borrowed a hidden camera from Mrs. Patterson's daughter, who had been following my situation with growing outrage and offered to help however she could. My plan was simple. I would invite Jake and Emma over for what they thought would be another of their regular visits, but this time I would be the one doing the secret recording. I wanted to capture their reaction when I confronted them with evidence of what they'd been doing. I wanted to hear in their own words how they justified exploiting their grandmother. I called Jake and asked if he and Emma could come over the following afternoon to help me with some household tasks. They agreed immediately, with Jake sounding especially eager to visit. Looking back, I realized he was probably excited about the income their next recording session would generate. When they arrived, they behaved exactly as they had during all their previous visits, cheerful, affectionate, and helpful. Emma complimented my appearance and asked about my day, while Jake mentioned some new improvements he wanted to make around my house. Their performance was so convincing that if I hadn't known the truth, I would have believed they were simply loving grandchildren. About 30 minutes into their visit, as they were preparing to split up to work in different rooms as usual, I asked them to sit down because I had something important to discuss with them. "What's up, Grandma?" Emma asked with apparent genuine concern. I placed the 7 cameras I had found on the coffee table in front of them and watched their faces change as they realized what they were looking at. I found these hidden throughout my house, I said calmly. I know you put them there and I know what you've been using them for. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake and Emma looked at each other, then at the cameras, then back at me. I could see them trying to figure out how much I knew and what their best response might be. Jake was the first to speak. Grandma, I can explain, it's not what you think. Really? I said, because I think you've been secretly filming me in my bathroom and bedroom and selling those videos to strangers on the internet. Is that not what's been happening? Emma started crying. We didn't mean for it to hurt you, she said through her tears. We were just trying to make some money for college and we thought you'd never find out. You thought I'd never find out that you were exploiting me for money. You thought it was acceptable to violate my privacy as long as I didn't know about it. Jake tried a different approach. Grandma, you don't understand how popular you are online. People really admire you. You're like famous now. Isn't that kind of cool? The fact that Jake thought I should be flattered by my unwitting internet fame made me angrier than anything else he could have said. You think I should be proud that strangers have been watching me shower and dress without my permission. It's not like that, Emma protested. The people who watch your videos really respect you. They think you're beautiful and elegant. You have fans who genuinely care about you. Fans who pay money to watch me without my knowledge or consent, I corrected her. That's not admiration, Emma, that's exploitation. The conversation continued for another hour, with Jake and Emma alternating between apologies, justifications, and attempts to minimize what they had done. They claimed they had never thought of it as harmful since I wasn't being physically hurt. They insisted that the money they were making was helping them pay for college expenses that their parents couldn't afford. They even suggested that I should be proud of how well my content was performing compared to other creators on the sites. What struck me most during this conversation was their complete inability to understand the fundamental violation of what they had done. They seemed to genuinely believe that as long as I wasn't physically harmed and didn't know about the cameras, their actions were essentially victimless. The worst part, I told them, is not just what you did to me, but the fact that you looked me in the eye every week and pretended to love me while you were exploiting me. You hugged me and told me you missed me while you were planning how to profit from violating my privacy. By the end of our conversation, Jake and Emma had admitted to everything. They confirmed that they had been operating multiple accounts on adult websites, that they had been earning thousands of dollars per month from my content, and that they had been planning to expand their operation to include more cameras in my house. They also revealed that they had been coordinating their visits to coincide with my nap times and bath times, because those generated the most popular content among their subscribers. The timing of their visits hadn't been coincidental. It had been carefully planned to maximize their access to footage that would sell well online. After they left that day, I sat alone with the recording I had made of our conversation, feeling emotionally drained but also oddly empowered. For the first time since discovering the cameras, I felt like I had some control over the situation. I spent the next several days deciding what to do with the evidence I had gathered. Sarah Chen had already provided me with enough documentation to pursue criminal charges, and now I had recorded confessions from Jake and Emma admitting to their crimes. The decision of whether to involve law enforcement was complicated by the fact that these were my grandchildren, but it was also complicated by the knowledge that they might be victimizing other elderly people. During our recorded conversation, Jake had mentioned that their business model was successful enough that they were considering expanding to include other subjects. The thought that Jake and Emma might be planning to exploit other vulnerable elderly people made my decision easier. I couldn't let my personal feelings about family relationships prevent me from stopping them from hurting others. I called the police and filed a report, providing them with all the evidence that Sarah had gathered plus the recording I had made of Jake and Emma's confessions. The detective assigned to my case was experienced in internet crimes and assured me that what my grandchildren had done constituted serious criminal violations. Cases like this are becoming more common, Detective Martinez told me, and we take them very seriously. The exploitation of elderly people for financial gain is a growing problem, and when it involves family members, it's particularly disturbing. The legal process moved quickly once I had filed the report. Jake and Emma were arrested within a week, and their computers and phones were seized as evidence. The investigation revealed the full scope of their operation, including the specific websites where my content had been shared and the amount of money they had earned from exploiting me. The financial records showed that Jake and Emma had made even more money than Sarah had initially estimated. Over the course of 4 months, they had earned almost $25,000 from their secret recordings of me. They had also been planning to recruit other elderly relatives into their operation, having researched the homes and routines of several great-aunts and elderly family friends. What made the case even more disturbing was the discovery that Jake and Emma had been part of a larger network of young people who were systematically exploiting elderly relatives for content creation. They had been sharing tips and techniques with other creators who were running similar operations with their own grandparents and elderly neighbors. The investigation revealed that this type of exploitation was more widespread than anyone had realized, with hundreds of elderly people being secretly recorded and exploited by family members who saw them as easy targets for financial gain. Jake and Emma were ultimately charged with multiple felonies, including invasion of privacy, exploitation of an elderly person, and distribution of non-consensual intimate recordings. They both pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement that required them to cooperate with law enforcement's investigation of the larger exploitation network. The legal consequences for my grandchildren were severe, but the personal consequences for our family were even more devastating. My son David and daughter Susan were horrified to learn what their children had done. Both of them called me in tears, apologizing for their children's behavior and expressing their complete support for my decision to press charges. "I'm so sorry, Mom," David said during one of our conversations. "I don't understand how I could have raised a child who would do something like this to his own grandmother. I'm ashamed and heartbroken." Susan was equally devastated. "Emma has always been such a sweet girl," she said. "I can't comprehend how she could participate in something so cruel. You did the right thing by calling the police." The hardest part of the entire experience was losing the relationships I thought I had with Jake and Emma. Despite everything they had done, I had genuinely loved spending time with them during their visits, even though those visits were based on deception. The grandchildren I thought I knew, loving, attentive, caring young people, had never really existed. They had been performances designed to facilitate my exploitation. The aftermath of the legal case brought some positive changes to my life, though they couldn't undo the violation I had experienced. The websites that had been hosting my content were required to remove it and pay substantial fines. Several other victims of similar exploitation schemes were identified and able to seek justice with the help of the evidence gathered from Jake and Emma's case. I also received a significant financial settlement from the websites that had profited from my exploitation. The money couldn't compensate for the violation of my privacy, but it did provide some sense that justice had been served. More importantly, my case helped raise awareness about this type of exploitation and led to stronger legal protections for elderly people. Several states passed new laws specifically targeting family members who exploit elderly relatives for online content creation. Looking back on this experience nearly 6 months later, I still struggle with the betrayal of trust that it represented. The knowledge that my own grandchildren were capable of exploiting me so callously has changed my perspective on family relationships and trust in ways that I'm still processing. But I've also discovered that I'm stronger and more resilient than I thought I was. The 77-year-old woman who discovered those cameras was devastated and confused. The 77-year-old woman who fought back and sought justice was empowered and determined. I've also learned that this type of exploitation is far more common than most people realize. Since my story became public through the court proceedings, I've been contacted by dozens of other elderly people who suspect they might be victims of similar schemes. Many of them have discovered that their sudden popularity with younger family members was actually motivated by financial exploitation rather than genuine affection. The most difficult aspect of moving forward has been rebuilding my sense of security and privacy in my own home. I had the house thoroughly swept for any remaining surveillance equipment, installed a legitimate security system, and changed all the locks. But the psychological impact of knowing that my most private moments were observed and commodified by strangers takes longer to overcome. I've also had to grapple with the strange knowledge that I apparently had hundreds of thousands of fans online who were watching my content without my knowledge or consent. The detective investigating my case told me that my videos were among the most viewed content in their category, which is both flattering and deeply disturbing. There's something surreal about discovering that you've been an unwitting internet celebrity, especially when that celebrity was built on the violation of your privacy. I've been told that some of the comments on my videos were actually quite respectful and complimentary, with viewers expressing genuine admiration for my appearance and grace. But knowing that this admiration was based on secretly recorded content makes it impossible to feel good about. The legal resolution of my case provided some closure, but it couldn't undo the fundamental violation that occurred. Jake and Emma both received sentences that included jail time, substantial fines, and requirements to participate in counseling and community service. They were also required to pay restitution for the profits they made from exploiting me. But more importantly, their cooperation with law enforcement helped expose and shut down the larger network of family members who were exploiting elderly relatives. Several dozen other cases were prosecuted as a result of the evidence gathered from their computers and phones. The experience has taught me important lessons about trust, family relationships, and the dangers that modern technology can create for vulnerable people. It's also shown me that age doesn't have to mean powerlessness, and that even elderly people can fight back effectively when they're victimized. If there's a positive outcome from this terrible experience, it's the awareness it has raised about a form of exploitation that was largely hidden before my case became public. The media attention surrounding my story has helped other elderly people recognize warning signs and seek help if they suspect they're being exploited. I've also become involved with organizations that advocate for elderly rights and privacy protection. My experience has given me a platform to speak about these issues and help other victims understand their options for seeking justice. The relationship between technology and elderly exploitation is only going to become more complex as devices become smaller and easier to conceal. My case involved relatively sophisticated equipment, but future cases might involve devices that are virtually impossible to detect without professional help. What I want other elderly people to know is that sudden changes in family members' behavior, especially increased attention and visits from younger relatives, should be viewed with some healthy skepticism. While it's wonderful when grandchildren want to spend more time with their grandparents, it's important to pay attention to patterns that seem unusual or overly focused on private spaces in the home. I also want families to have honest conversations about the financial pressures that young people face and the ethical boundaries that should never be crossed, even when money is tight. Jake and Emma claimed that their financial struggles justified their actions, but there is no financial situation that justifies exploiting elderly family members. The technology that was used to violate my privacy will only become more advanced and accessible over time. It's crucial that elderly people and their families stay informed about these risks and take appropriate precautions to protect themselves. Looking toward the future, I'm cautiously optimistic about rebuilding relationships with other family members while maintaining appropriate boundaries and security measures. The violation I experienced has made me more aware of potential risks, but it hasn't made me want to isolate myself from all family relationships. I'm also hopeful that my case will contribute to stronger legal protections and greater awareness that will help prevent other elderly people from experiencing similar exploitation. If sharing my story can help even one other person avoid what I went through, then some good will have come from this terrible experience. The hardest lesson I've learned is that the people we trust most are sometimes the ones most capable of hurting us. But I've also learned that it's possible to survive that betrayal and find ways to turn a victimizing experience into an opportunity to help others and advocate for change. My grandchildren may have seen me as an easy target for exploitation, but they underestimated their grandmother's strength and determination to seek justice. I may be 77 years old, but I'm still capable of fighting for myself and for other elderly people who might face similar violations. If you found this story compelling, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Share your thoughts about elderly exploitation and technology safety in the comments below. To hear another powerful story about family betrayal and unexpected strength, click on the suggested video appearing on your screen now.